So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the accumulative instinct. The accumulative instinct. And it was around the idea of Earth Day, and it was around a principle that Charles Fillmore talked about how we have this instinct to grow, this instinct to get. And how if that is not spiritual in nature and not spiritually centered, that instinct can show up in ways that create discord, right? The ways that create disharmony. It can show up as greed. It can show up as power. It can show up as obsession. It can show up as running down rabbit holes, trying to find happiness, trying to find peace, and finding that it wasn't in any of those things. Because the accumulative instinct is about an internal practice. It's a spiritual principle. So today, we're going to talk about the intuitive instinct. The intuitive instinct is something that is within each one of us. We often relate to it as the feminine principle or the divine feminine, God as love, as that mothering potential, that mothering ideal within each one of us. But we know it's not contained in gender, that would limit it. But it is one of our divine faculties. It is part of who we are as beings. And when it is rightfully understood and rightfully applied to the world around us, we experience more God in the world, right? Who doesn't have a shout out for the mothering energy on this planet, right? Right? It's been talked about a lot lately that if we had more women in leadership, more women in government roles, more women running countries, more women in these positions, that there might be more of a gentleness, more of a co-creativity, more of a unity consciousness in our leadership. And when we have males that have that energy well developed, amen, right? It is an incredible thing to witness. When we explore all aspects of ourselves, when we dive into who we are and we start bringing out our pure potential. So we have these divine faculties, and often, if they are not spiritually understood and we have not developed or applied them, then we feel like there is something wrong. We feel like there is something bad, and we often point fingers and think that it's something outside of ourselves, or it's somehow life is lacking, life is problematic. Or someone or something, call it God, call it whatever, call it your neighbor, call it your husband, whatever you want to call it, is doing something to you. The government, the system, whatever it is, right, is doing something to us, and there is somehow a problem that we can't surpass, we can't overcome. But the truth is that supply and source is everywhere present. It is inexhaustible, and it is ours to dive into that truth and to activate it. There is a quote I love by Paulo Coelho, one of my favorite authors. He wrote The Alchemist and a bunch of other books. But he says something about opinions, and your opinions will never do much to transform the world, will never do much to change the world. Your opinions don't make much of a difference as far as actions, but your actions do. How you show up does. The love you embody does. That's what makes a difference. And that's what we're here to dive into. Often we go into this loop or cycle in life where we have suffering, where we are centered in the ego because of a misapplication or misunderstanding of this divine instinct of our internal guidance system. We often take these impulses and our intuition and our instinct, and we make them for ourselves. We make it personal rather than collective and universal, rather than something to apply to everyone outside of ourselves as well as the inner. We often use it to self-serve or dominate or become better than, rather than to humble us and to allow us into sacred service, into serving the spirit of love among us. We often use it to accumulate rather than to generate. And when we use our divine faculties for these self-serving purposes without spiritual application, balance, and the universal purpose, it can often lead to disappointment, upset. It can lead to feeling disconnected, discord, a lack of harmony, a lack of unity. But we're endowed with these creative resources. When we underutilize these spiritual resources, we can shut down our instincts, our intuition. We can discredit our internal nature and even our wisdom. Is there anyone here who's been taught to discredit your own wisdom? We're not always nourished and nurtured in the gifts that we have. Often we're taught at younger ages that, oh, you didn't see that, you didn't think that, nope, that didn't happen. We can even stand in our own household. Some people even exist in marriages where they don't have the truth. They don't have honesty. They don't have transparency. So they don't even have the ability to make the choices they would make if they could see everything as it were, because things are held from them. But if there was truth and honesty, transparency, they would be able to tune into their intuition. And sometimes we stand there tuning into our intuition, and someone stares at us, looks right in the eye, and says, no, that's not happening. If you've ever had this experience, it is rattling. It is rattling, and it feels like to me that someone's playing God with me. Whether they think I am not strong enough to handle the truth, whether or not they think that I don't deserve to handle the truth, whatever it is. When someone plays with my intuition, it is disturbing. Because at a core level for me, that's mine. But you know what has worked for me? Is allowing that to inform me. I was in a beautiful relationship of growth and discovery. And one of the things in that relationship was that it had some elements of not exactly telling the truth to it. And I would get these intuitions, these knowings. And so I would go in conversation with my beloved to these instinctual moments of going, this is what I'm feeling, or this is what I'm getting. He would say, no, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. But I'm getting that. And it taught me how to start speaking from what I was getting, because it was gnawing. Because you know what happens? What happens when there is not an honoring of the intuitive knowing? What happens is we either think there's something wrong with us, right? There's something wrong with me, and we start shutting it down, or we become depressed. We become stuck. Because what's happening inside is a little storm. It's like part of your being is saying, I know something and I'm getting wisdom. It's like the source of all life is speaking to us, but then it's being slapped down and shut down. Can you feel that? Have you ever felt that? Yeah. It happens a lot with kids. It really does. They get something, they feel something. Maybe they're witnessing some energy and they speak to it, and the adults in the room, that's not happening. Shh. And we begin to get confused. But I had the great gift of having a partner who was also very authentic and very much on the spiritual path, and eventually would come around in the conversation of these intuitive moments and going, wait, but okay. And then I would share what I was getting and what I was hearing. And I've had people do this with me in jaw-dropping ways, like things that they could not know about what's going on in my life. And they start saying something to me. And even though it's like, I don't really want to share that business, that's a little too personal and too private, I'm really not interested in sharing. What I say is, you have a gift. You have a gift, and keep listening. Keep developing that. Because even if I don't want to share it, I am in awe that they are tuned in and connected. So my beloved would eventually roll around and say, yes, that's what's going on, or this, that. And finally, he just started saying, you've got to stop reading my mind. That's not fair. You've got to just get out of it and stay out of it. It's not fair. And I was like, well, it's not up to me, I just know these things. I can't explain how, but it is a knowing. And what that did for me in that time in the relationship, see, some people might be tempted, and I may have been tempted to call something wrong and to make that a problem, right? To criticize the relationship for it, to criticize the person for it. But it was one of the greatest gifts, because it helped me recognize that when I'm hearing or feeling or sensing these things, I'm not crazy. It's not silly. And most times in life, you don't get an opportunity that is that authentic to discuss it with someone in a way that you can learn it and test it out and go, it shocked even me. Like I have been moved to walk to a particular place, to bend down, to do something, to just pause for a moment that I was supposed to be aware of or supposed to witness in a particular way. But when we don't have the validation, when we don't have the receptive space for our intuitive knowing, our intuitive nature, it can get shut down and we can forget that we have it. And we begin to live as if we don't have a guidebook. We begin to live as if we don't have resources. We begin to live as if we don't know. And the good news is we've just forgotten. It's not that we don't know. It's not that we've been abandoned. It's not that we don't have what other people have. Maybe we haven't invested in it. Maybe we haven't noticed in it. Maybe it wasn't affirmed, or maybe it was directly shut down. But it's there in every single one of us. Were you supported? Were you encouraged to develop your instinctive abilities, your intuition? Or were you taught not to pay attention to it? Or was it just a non-issue, not a topic of conversation? There's a practice around diving into that, taking that into meditation, opening up and asking again, saying, I'm listening again. If I wasn't listening before, here I am. Show me my intuitive ability. And part of that is connected with the divine feminine as nurturing, as instinct. There are many times that I have been in my own space thinking I'm going to process my own thing, and then that intuition comes forward, that instinct and that knowing comes forward. And I have an experience where I recognize that I was needed. I was the one needed. It wasn't so much that I needed someone else to support me in that moment, but someone else had more going on, and they needed me not to be in my stuff, not to be in my ego, not to be in what's going on with me. They needed me to be present for a holy moment. And those moments heal us. Those moments are what we need when we feel like life is breaking down, or life is rocking us to our core, or life has given us something unexpected or something insurmountable. The divine energy, the divine faculty of feminine and mothering is more than enough to meet everything in front of us when it has receptivity, when it has space, when it is fully received. We get dreams, we have gifts, we have knowings. Let us not let it be trained out of us. Oftentimes, our intuitive self is screaming or coiling. Do we honor that? Do we listen to it? We have a tendency to trash it. Just like we do with a lot of spiritual resources, the Mother Earth, we trash it and then we say, oh, look, it's not working. Community, we trash it and then we say, oh, look, it's not there for us. Relationships, sometimes we trash them and then we complain we don't have them. So can we step into our co-creative ability? I was recently in a great conversation with beloveds, and they were talking about our sensitivities and our intuitive knowings, and one person shared their sensitivities, and when we're talking about sensitivities, I'm talking intuitive abilities, I'm talking sensitivities, body, mind, spirit, wellness sensitivities. And so we were specifically talking about some foods and allergies and other things like that. And she was saying if we paid attention to the sensitive ones, like we tend to discount them or say, oh, look, they have some weird thing, like, oh, they can't do gluten, odd, weird. But if instead we listen to those sensitivities among us, if we really listen to it, if we listen to when women cry out, when women wail, for whatever reason it is, if we listen to that feminine, if we listen to the sensitivity, Oh, the wisdom we will receive. Because oftentimes, it's applicable to everyone in some shape or form. Now, maybe it's with the, food and sensitivities. Maybe it's just a lighter tolerance or a heavier tolerance for something. But it can lead us and guide us to what the body system needs, what is really healthy for everyone. Maybe there's someone that's allergic to mold and someone that's not. Well, let's get the person that's allergic to mold in there and make sure this place is cleared out. Make sure it's healthy, make sure it's safe. Just because everyone else doesn't go home having an incredible reaction doesn't mean they weren't swimming in the same sea. Doesn't mean that they weren't affected by the same toxins or whatever it is. But see, the one with sensitivity can be honored for their wisdom. But often we throw out sensitivity and pretend that it's weakness, pretend that it's lack. From Proverbs 3:13, it says, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold." This is one of my favorite passages in Scripture. It goes on to say, "She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honors. Her ways are pleasant ways, and her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to all who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed." But do we always make the space for Lady Wisdom, for the divine feminine, for God as love? We're here to be emulations of love. We're here to embody this love. We're endowed with the capabilities to magnify that and multiply that in the collective among us. And with right application of our instincts, of our intuitions, of that motherly love that protects, that cares, that serves, that cherishes, that honors, that stewards, that empowers. With that, we have more than enough. But we often either shut it down or we just make it about me and mine. Just about me and mine. I want to share a story a little bit about someone shutting it down. If any of you know the author David White, he is a very poetic author. And he has beautiful work. And in the book called Crossing the Unknown Sea, he talks about his time in the Galapagos Islands. And he had time as a guide, and he would take people to a blowhole by the sea, by the ocean. And if you've ever seen one, like a geyser, right? It's like, I've seen them in Hawaii, but it's like you have all the rocks, you have the lava rocks all around, and you have a blowhole, and the water shoots up out of there and comes back down. And he starts telling this story. And in the story, he says, as a guide, I would take people to see this blowhole. And more often than not, I would stand near the edge of the crack and take a saltwater shower under the falling plume. He goes on to talk about this time that he had a friend that was a guide as well with him. And he said, I persuaded my fellow guide, Matt, to join me at the edge of the blowhole. He was a little hesitant, but soon joined in the exhilarations of being showered by scattering tons of water falling upon us from a great height. So hear that little moment, right? He was hesitant. So he goes on to tell the story, and what happened is quite horrific. It didn't happen the way it normally happened each time. Usually it would go out and come up, and the water went down. And this time that he was there on the edge with everybody taking photos, the water went down, and then it stayed down, and then it didn't come back. And he started getting concerned about it. He said, I looked at the sea below. There the ocean was curling itself up into the most frightful pent-up tsunami of water. I grabbed Matt's arm and shouted, God Almighty! We barely had time to turn away when the mighty surge barreling back up the crack, was overtaken by the huge wave itself, rolling over the top of the cliff. He goes on to talk about how he tried holding on. He put his feet first. He hit the lava wall. He kind of comes to, and during one of the surges, he comes to, and there he is hanging onto the edge of the blowhole with his feet dangling in, and there is Matt over the edge of the seawall hanging on with his feet hanging over. And then there's one more surge of water, and it takes them both, and it throws them against the wall, and they do come up. They didn't get totally washed out to sea, but they come out after being lacerated, he says, and shocked. He said that when he saw Matt and he looked up, he had blood running down his back and arms. And then he says this: a freak wave, 2 freak waves, near destruction, and then a return to a shocked normality. I had heard about them. Waves out of nowhere, even in the midst of the ocean, turning boats over. But I had never witnessed it. He goes on to say, I had been struck to the core, as if my insides had been rearranged, as if touched by God in a Greek drama. In the old Greek stories depicting fleeting encounters with divinity, the touch of God was already experienced as both violation and blessing. The violation was in my stomach. Someone had reached inside me and in no uncertain terms informed me that I was like everything else in the world. I had no immunity. Sometimes in life and in the human condition, we have this experience. We have our own version of the waves rolling in and changing everything in an instant. Normality being stripped away and being present to pain, suffering, discord, dis-ease. Breathe into that for a moment with me. That's part of the human condition. Part of the human condition, I think, is this archetype of experience, and he describes it as a physical experience by the ocean. But I know mothers that have had this experience with their children. I know mothers that are having this experience right now. I know women and I know men that are feeling what he describes here in that moment of the water rushing in and unexpectedly shifting everything. The experiences that can break us, shatter us, and throw us against a wall are no doubt rattling. The spirit of the divine feminine, the energy of true mothering, has more than enough love, more than enough capacity, more than enough space to cradle us and to carry us through these moments when we are waiting and ready with receptive arms. When we take this energy and we don't hold it just for ourselves or for our own children, but when we lift it up for all humanity, when we offer it to each other, when we give it out. That's what's ours to do on every level, in our own body, for our own healing, our own wholeness, for our community, for our nation, for our world. The time has come. Martha Creek, in her latest newsletter that I shared a prayer from this morning, also said this in her Mother's Day letter. She said, "It's a lie. If you don't know Martha Creek, get ready. Just buckle your little safety belt for a second. It's a lie. Mother's Day was never about brunch. Mother's Day wasn't created by Hallmark. Mother's Day was created by a grieved activist, revolutionary love warrior named Julia Ward Howe. Tired of war, tired of tribalism being valued above lives of the vulnerable, her pain and hope merged and became her mission. After living through the bloodshed of the Civil War, she called out for peace. She called out for revolution. She called the day of the revolution Mother's Day. In the spirit of Julia Howe, Martha says, and every other revolutionary for love, let's take back Mother's Day by mothering all, yes, all, me, them, those people. Let's become the leaders we were waiting for. Let us leave our mark on the world, and let that mark be radical, relentless, dangerous love that reaches beyond ourselves and beyond our neighborhoods and races and religions and rules and borders and differences and fear. Let our love insist that there is no such thing as other people's children, that there is no peace for a parent until all children have peace, and that there is no rest for a child of God until all children of God can rest. The world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. Paulo Coelho. Right application of this mothering instinct within all of us is more than enough to meet each moment with grace. You and I, we all have an insane ability, an incredible faculty that is widely underutilized. Going back to a little bit of David White's story, and there are so many stories to tell from his book, but he goes into later talk about a time he had with his mother. And he says this. This is from the excerpt called Plucked from the Waves. He said, as the waves recede, I come 3 years later to the armchair in Yorkshire and my mother sipping whiskey. So this is 3 years later, he's sitting with his mother. The Jameson was a sweet accompaniment to a late night bittersweet talk. I was home only for a short stay, and we were talking about my travels and the amount of time I spent away from her. In the Irish fashion, my mother was telling me how much she missed me, how she thought of me every day and said a prayer to herself for my safety every night. She used what he calls the Irish power of blessing, welling into her late-night words. He said I nodded in good son-like fashion, but was ready to move on to other more adult things appropriate to a grown man talking with his mother. But before I could encourage the conversation onto other ground, she began telling me about a vivid dream she had woken from during my time in the Galapagos 3 years before. Apparently, in the dream, I had been standing on a black cliff with one other person next to a fountain of water. A huge, frightening wave bore down on us in the dream, the blowhole on Hood Island. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as she spoke, describing in clear detail from her dream the exact circumstance of my near drowning. I had never so much breathed a word of the incident, knowing how much she worried about me at the best of times, nor had I told my father or either of my sisters. You were standing on the edge of the cliff next to the strange fountain when a big wave came over the top and swept you away. You came floating back in all the turmoil, but then another bigger wave came, and you were being taken out to sea. I felt the blackness of the water waiting for you. In the dream, I leaned down from above and took hold of you by the back of the neck. I lifted you out and put you safely back on the cliff. When I woke, I felt so happy that I had been able to save you. He says, I looked at my mother with total amazement. The hair rising on my neck and the shiver in my spine had little to do with the Jameson, which I had to put down. I was shocked into silence to hear such a precise description of something so private to me, clear description of the frightening trauma I had been trying, I realized, to forget. Far away on that lonely shore, the sound of the waves seemed to surround me as she spoke, the smoke of the sea spray thundering amidst birds' cries. I looked at her as if I had seen a ghost, which I had. He goes on to say, I told my mother the other side of the story. We stared into our glasses, we looked at each other. He goes on to say they had moments and they began to laugh, and bloody marvelous, isn't it? I said. Here I am adventuring around the world like some invulnerable version of Indiana Jones. Lord, of all I survey, and all the time it is my bloody mother coming in like the cavalry at the end and saving me from the jaws of destruction. We raised the glass together, hooting at the image. But as the laughter subsided, I found myself telling myself in no uncertain terms, David, whatever it is you think you are, give it up. There are powers at play in the world about which you know very little. Like, for instance, this little woman sitting in front of you who sponsored your exclusive membership into this hard-to-obtain world, and for all you know, still pays a hefty part of your annual dues. There are forces at play which we know little of. There are intuitive abilities which we underplay. This is the power of divine mothering. Let us listen to the true, authentic cries and voice of the mother within all of us and the mother among us, guiding us, leading us. Let us make a receptive space, community, world, so that we may be an inlet and an outlet of this love. Let's take this into a moment of meditation together. We just breathe in this moment, entering a state of allowing, connecting with the heart center. Here I am, receptive, responsive, awake, aware, listening. So very grateful. Teach me, lead me, show me. Allow me to support the feminine instinct within all beings, within all creation, within my own life. When I see it around me, give me the wisdom to take the first step back, to become quiet, to bow down. To honor it when I see it, know it when I hear it, emanate it. Inhaling and exhaling, we know and trust that we are wonderfully made, endowed with spiritual abilities that guide us, care for us, provide for us. Inhaling and exhaling into the silence. May all beings have freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings know God as love, as mother, and themselves as emanations of this love. May all beings know that we are born blessed and here to be a blessing. We dedicate this service today to Mary Lou Cupp and Diane Wilkes for the spirit of mothering that you are and that you bring to your community. We are with you. Namaste.